like me. Now once was lost, but now am found. Was blind, but now I see. Are gone, I've been set free. I got my Savior has ransomed me, and like a flood, His mercy reigns, unending love, amazing grace. Are gone, I've been set free. I got my Savior has ransomed me, and like a flood, His mercy reigns, unending love, amazing
Thanks, guys. It's difficult to summarize a life like Craig's 59 years into 20 minutes or 2,500 words. I've known the Woodworth family and Craig for 30 years. Hard to imagine in lots of capacities, from Craig being a teacher of mine and a mentor to me being a pastor. And he used to jokingly call me Pastor Pat because he knew I hated that. And it was sort of his little tongue-in-cheek way of saying, I can't believe you're a pastor. I have enough memories in the last 30 years to take up all of our time today that would make us laugh and make us cry. And I'm going to give you a chance to do that later, so I'm not going to take all the time for me. Instead, I want to spend a few minutes highlighting the man Craig was and why I think he was that way. And then I'll give you a chance to tell some stories and ways that Craig impacted you. Craig Woodworth, Woody to some, Craig to most, was born May 17th, 1955. And last Friday, March 6th, he lay down to rest before work. And I would suspect for him, the next thing he knew is he found himself surfing in heaven. And while that's probably great for Craig, the shock to us has been crushing. Particularly for his wife of 37 years, Carolyn, his mom, affectionately known as Mama Cass, his kids, Ryan and Bryn, Courtney, Katie and Demir, his two grandkids, Carter and Kennedy, his brother Pete and his wife Diane, and a host of extended family and friends and colleagues and clients. Craig grew up in Pasadena, and even though he has lived in Arizona for 30 years, he never lost his passion for the beach and for surfing, and regularly planned trips and made trips to California to hit the waves. When I asked Mama Casa about Craig's childhood, she smiled and she said, "He was rotten." And then I think she realized how that sounded, and she said, "I mean, he was active." And all through his school-age years, Craig was one of those ornery, mischievous, troublemaking kids that always seemed to have to learn the lesson the hard way. He wasn't going to take your word for it. He was going to have to learn himself. In 1978, Craig was big into disco and Saturday Night Fever. I would love some pictures of that. And one night at a disco club, he used the "Do I know you" line on this petite, cute little girl named Carolyn. And less than a year later, they were married. And then came Ryan. And then Courtney. And then in 1983, the Woodworths moved to Phoenix to work in Craig's dad's roofing business and to get a fresh start at life. And in 1987, Katie was born. And I remember that day because we had a softball game that night. And an hour and a half after Katie was born, Craig showed up to play softball. As Carolyn tells the story, she's packing her bags to go to the hospital, and Craig is throwing his softball bag in the back of the truck. She says, "What are you doing?" He says, "I know you're going to have the in time for me to make it to softball." Now, I was only 16 at the time, but I remember consciously thinking, that just can't be right. Or Craig has the coolest wife ever. Both of which I think are probably true. But that was Craig. He loved sports. He loved to play sports. He could hit a softball further than any person I'd ever seen. Ryan was saying at the house this week, whenever his dad would come up to bat, everybody would stop no matter where they were to watch. And then his dad would bat, and then they'd go back to playing or doing whatever it was that they were doing. He loved to watch sports. Craig was the first person I'd ever heard use the phrase man cave. He was going to turn his garage into a man cave, and he did. 3 TVs, any gaming system you would want. He loved his man cave. He coached some of his kids when they were younger, and he always made his kids play a sport. He didn't care what. They just had to play. They had to be active and on a team. As I listened to the stories of Craig, as well as my own experiences, and there's sort of a theme that's arisen out of that for me this week that I want to share with you today. And that theme is love. Craig had an amazing capacity to love. And I think it's what I will remember most about him. I know that doesn't sound very manly for a guy who was 6'2" and had the demeanor that Craig had sometimes, and his quick temper. And I'm not sure he would articulate it that way either. Because Craig's love wasn't something that he necessarily said to many a lot. Instead, he demonstrated it. He demonstrated it in his actions, and we knew it. You felt it when you spent time in his presence. He didn't have to say it. One thing Craig loved deeply was his family. And while everyone nodded around the room when somebody said that Craig had a quick temper, they also all agreed that Craig was quick to forgive. He was the first one to move on, to make things right, to find peace. One of the verses that Craig would sometimes quote from the Bible was a proverb that goes like this: "It's better to live in the desert than with a quarrelsome, complaining wife." And he would joke, "I have both." And he might not have always got the words right, but if you knew Craig, then you knew he loved Carolyn. And he demonstrated his love by doing little things that were meaningful to her, like filling up her car with gas, fixing things around the house, keeping the outside of the house in step with the immaculate condition that she kept the inside of the house in, supporting their kids. Carolyn told me Craig was the perfect complement for her because he was everything that she wasn't, and she was everything that he wasn't. Craig worked hard to provide for his family. In years when the construction world wasn't cutting it, Craig would work as many jobs as he had to provide for his family. Jobs that people today might see as humbling or beneath them, but not Craig. Things like delivering papers and working at his friend's Dairy Queen. Craig did those things because he loved his family and he wanted to provide for them. Craig rarely missed a kid's sporting event. He would drive hours if he had to, even if he knew his kid wouldn't play, to be there to support them. Just last week, Craig went to watch Ryan coach volleyball at GCU. And Craig loved being a grandpa. He was proud of his family. And even though Mama Cass said he was rotten when he was little, she was proud of the man he had become. And Craig was a good son. And he called his mom every single day to see how she was, to see what she needed, to share the awesome deals that he'd found in the ad section of the newspaper on Wednesday because he'd gotten up an hour early to check it out. Another thing Craig loved was God. Craig's faith in Jesus was a big part of his life. And while many of us doubt our faith from time to time, Craig didn't seem to. He had this unwavering faith that God was going to come through somehow, or God was going to somehow work things out. The Bible verse that he quoted often was Matthew 6:27, where Jesus says, "Can all your worries add a single moment to your life?" And he would say, "No, God's got it." When Courtney was 9, she was passed over for a spot in her school's choir. And she still remembers her dad's advice: trust God, not man, because God sees what man can't. That's the way he lived. He believed that. He believed that when he struggled in his life. He believed that when he struggled in his marriage. He believed that when he struggled in his career. He believed that when he saw his kids struggle. And I know your dad was always proud of you. Because he always believed that God was doing something or going to do something amazing. No matter what your circumstances were and no matter who created them. Optimistic? Absolutely. But his optimism came from a faith, his trust in a God that seemed so very personal to Craig. And Craig loved his church. He volunteered in a bunch of different functions over the years. He's a bus driver, a greeter, a youth worker, an usher. He'd set up and tear down for big events. 3 of my 4 kids had Craig as a Sunday school teacher. And they remember him because Craig and his friend John always had the absolute best treasure box. They did not have lame church toys in this treasure box. These were full-size candy bars and games and toys. My daughter put on Facebook, Craig is one of the reasons she loved going to church. He also went on visitation. That's where we'd go visit people who were either new or hadn't been around church for a while. And Craig was a volunteer in our high school ministry when I was in high school. And for a while, he was even my Sunday school teacher. So Craig would show up on Monday nights and he would drive for visitation. And most of the time, only 2 high schoolers showed up for visitation. Me and my girlfriend. And there was a reason that we showed up for visitation. And it wasn't because we were spiritual. It was because Craig was the driver. Because on visitation, Craig would let Jen and I sit in the back seat of his Thunderbird and snuggle and kiss while he drove us all over town. And every now and then we'd have to stop and go meet somebody. Then he'd pull into Circle K and he'd look in the rearview mirror and he'd say, I'll be back in 5 minutes. Okay? I'm going to go in there. I'll be right back. 5 minutes. Now, that might not have been one of Craig's most finest hours as a chaperone, but I did appreciate it. And Craig loved the Bible. He was like a sponge soaking up all he could, asking questions, not so he could be knowledgeable, but because he wanted to make sense of the Bible and how it fit into his life, how it worked. He spent time reading his Bible every single morning at the kitchen table, including the morning he passed away. It's the way he spent time with his God, trying to get to know him, trying to understand him, trying to make him even more personal than he already was to Craig. He loved his God and he loved his faith. But Craig also had an amazing capacity to love what I would say are outsiders. It didn't matter what you were outside of: work, sports, church, family. Craig was kind and generous, even with strangers. Somebody said that he'd give his last dollar if they needed it. And Carolyn quickly chimed in, and he often did. And Craig never gave up on people. He didn't like anyone feeling outside. He tried to bring peace however he could, wherever he went. And Craig had a unique love for people outside of his faith in Jesus. He wasn't a preacher. He didn't bully people with God talk. But he wasn't ashamed of his faith. And he believed that Jesus was the answer for everyone. And he would have no problem telling you if you asked. And that belief was more than just words. That love was more than just words. He demonstrated it by his actions. I remember Craig wanting to move the church softball team into a city league so that we could rub elbows with those who still needed Jesus. So he didn't want to play softball with a bunch of people who already knew Jesus. What was the fun in that? And that was how Craig thought. He intentionally took his faith to where faith wasn't, long before it was cool to do that. As a result, Craig had a way of making everyone feel comfortable. He didn't judge or look down his nose at people. He didn't see certain people as inferior. You might think it was just because he's a nice guy. But I think it was something else. I think there was more to Craig than just being a nice guy. As I was thinking this week about Craig and his life and his impact on me and my family and listening to and reading all the Craig stories, I was drawn to a Bible story that I'm not sure if Craig epitomizes it or it epitomizes Craig, but it just screamed Craig. In Luke chapter 7, Jesus is eating dinner with a religious leader when a woman approaches Jesus and she falls at his feet and dumps perfume all over him and is crying and kissing his feet. And the host of the dinner thought in his own mind, Jesus must not be a prophet, because if he was a prophet, he would know that this woman was immoral and dirty and unworthy and doesn't belong here. And knowing what his host was thinking, Jesus tells him a story of a wealthy man who loans $100,000 to one person and $8,000 to another person. But neither person can repay the debt. And the wealthy man forgives them both, the $100,000 debt and the $8,000 debt. And Jesus asks his host, "Who do you suppose loved the wealthy man after that?" And in that moment, Jesus points to an important principle: that great forgiveness creates the capacity for great love. Jesus said in Luke chapter 7, verse 47, "I tell you, her sins, and they are many, have been forgiven, so she has shown me much love." And if I could make that personal for us today, if I could make that personal for Craig today, I would say, I tell you, Craig's sins, and they were many, have been forgiven. So he has shown us much love. Why did Craig love the way he loved? It's because he had been forgiven much. Craig's childhood and his adolescence and his young adulthood was filled with searching and trouble. He was always in trouble for something. And as a young husband and a dad, he struggled with a long-term drug addiction that he was hiding that probably should have killed him. But in the midst of his darkest days, he experienced a profound forgiveness from his family and his God. And that gave him the capacity for profound love. A love for people who were struggling like he did. A love for the down and out like he was sometimes. A love for those who'd not yet experienced the forgiveness of a God that loved him like he had experienced. Those that heard Craig pray know that every prayer he prayed, he thanked God for his grace, love, and mercy. But I don't think those were just filler words for Craig. I think God's grace and his love and his mercy were real, felt, experienced concepts for Craig. God's grace and love and mercy had protected him from himself and forgave him. God had erased his debt. Like this woman, Craig was probably looked down on by some in religious circles because Craig didn't really fit the mold all the time. He needed reasons for rules. Just to have rules was dumb. Why do that? Why do I have to do that? And he pushed the envelope for acceptable behavior sometimes. But even still, he demonstrated his amazing capacity to love by his actions. He didn't cry at our feet and dump perfume all over us. He showed his love by inviting you over to his house and making you dinner. He showed love by teaching his kids and the kids at his church the Bible. He showed love by trying to patch roofs instead of replace them, which is why he didn't sell as many roofs. But he didn't care because he really loved people and he didn't want to put them with something that they couldn't deal with or pay for. He showed love by showing up. He showed his love by taking boys or young men without dads and teaching them how to throw a ball or hammer a nail and build a fire. And then Jesus says to the woman, "Your sins are forgiven, your faith has saved you, go in peace." And in these few words, Jesus summarizes his message of hope and good news for the woman, for Craig, for you, and for me. And the good news is this: you can be forgiven. You can be saved from the spiritual consequences of your sin. And in this verse, Jesus tells us how. He says, your faith has saved you. Faith. Belief in Jesus. Trusting in Him, relying on Him instead of something else, instead of your own effort. Craig wasn't trying to earn God's forgiveness, nor was he trying to earn his way to heaven. And some of you who knew him in certain contexts might say, no kidding. But Jesus' words here were real and personal for Craig because his sins were forgiven because he'd believed in Jesus for that forgiveness. And I believe the Bible teaches that Craig's in heaven today, not because he was a good guy, not because he was a good dad and a good husband and a good church person, not because he earned it, not because he performed well, but because he trusted God for it. And he knew he hadn't earned it. He also knew he couldn't unearn it. Because it was God's promise, not his performance, that forgave him. Craig's capacity to love and make people feel comfortable came from his faith in an all-knowing, all-powerful God that loved him enough to forgive his debt. And I know Craig would want nothing more than for every person in this room to experience the profound forgiveness that he did. And then to live life and to love people like we'd actually been forgiven. Because that's the way Craig lived. When I think of Craig, I want to remember to love like the woman and to not judge like the religious leader. Craig knew he'd been forgiven much, and it opened his hearts to those who needed the most forgiveness. He had an amazing tolerance for people, maybe even too much sometimes. But when you see yourself in other people, you tend to cut them some slack. And that's the way Craig loved. He never lost sight of the fact that that used to be him, and he'd been forgiven. I will miss Craig's presence, but I'm inspired by his perspective and love for people. Now it's your turn. We're going to have a couple of mics, as in microphones, walking around the auditorium, and I want to give you an opportunity to share with us a short story, memory, something meaningful about Craig. And so we can hear from as many of you as possible. I'm going to ask you to please limit your talk to a thing or two. There's a lot of people here, and almost everybody probably has a Craig story of some sort. So I want to be able to get to as many people as we can. So if if you'd like to do that, just put up your hand, and Nancy will find you. Please use the microphone because we're recording this for the family, and we would like to be able to hear it. So who's going to be first?
Hello, everyone. My name is Mark Hayworth, and I was one of the lucky ones. I grew up in the same neighborhood with Craig, so I knew him from about 4 or 5 years old. And we had a lot of good times and good memories. One of the things we got to do was go surfing. His dad, Pete, used to drive us to the beach in the back of his pickup truck. And back then, there wasn't any surf report, so you didn't know how big it was going to be. And we got down there one day, and it was probably 6 to 8 feet. Pete said, he drove us all the way down there, so he said, get out there. So we ended up paddling out, and we were out in the water, and there was a wave that came in about 8 feet. I looked over, and there goes Craig. It's a big closeout, and he's taking off anyways. Yeah, he made the drop, but he just wiped out, and he just went for it. And that's the way he lived life, and he made everybody feel so special. And if we can just all be a little bit more like Craig, the world will be a better place. Thank you.
I'll follow on Mark. My name is Bill Wright. I grew up with Craig too. First, had the pleasure of meeting him when we moved down to Pasadena. I was in the 4th grade, and it was the beginning of just a very wonderful, almost magical, lifelong friendship. And that's the kind of guy Craig was. You became his friend, you were his friend. And all of us sitting here from Pasadena, we grew up with Craig. And I don't know, Craig was just such a neat person. And he was our team leader. He was the glue that held us all together. And I can't tell you how many times when later in life, we have so many stories, and so we won't go into it. But, just playing kick the can, capture the flag, hitching rides down to the Arroyo Seco and climbing the barbed wire fence to go down the concrete wash that was this long, wet, mossy concrete wash. And it was pretty scary just to sit down and go, but Craig would run and jump and try and stand up in his tennis shoes, We just had so much fun. We were so blessed as kids. We were this band of brothers that, were fortunate enough not to have to go through war, but we were able to grow our friendship just pursuing life and living life and loving life. And everything was just always an adventure with Craig. And I just feel so fortunate that we were all really able to pursue and live the American dream. And Craig was there leading the charge. And later in life, when we kind of all settled down and we had our families, and Wayne here got everybody back and come out to San Diego. And I can't tell you how many times we were just all in stitches. We go surfing during the day and come back and we were just doubled over with some story Craig was telling or Craig poking fun at himself. So we all feel very blessed.
My name's Thomas, and my fondest memories of Craig begin with a smile and end with a smile. I would like to say he had beautiful parents, and we had many great times together, from winning our Little League 7- and 8-year-old championship. Craig was the best left-hand pitcher, and I pitched right-handed. But anyways, so we had great fond memories as children, and he had beautiful parents, and every memory that I have of Craig is felt by everybody in this room, I'm sure. It's just, he is one of those people that just really wanted the world to be a better place, and he had very much love for everybody. And we're really going to miss him.
My name is Dave Ward, and I grew up with Craig, kindergarten, first grade. And of course, I haven't seen Mama Cass in 40, 50 years, and the first thing she says to me is, you know, Dave, you and Craig were rotten in the first grade. Oh boy, thanks for that, Mama Cass. So, as all of us brothers here from the Hastings Ranch gang in Pasadena, so many, as we all said, so many adventures together. And the most important aspect of Craig's life was his strong belief in Jesus Christ. And I was fortunate to be able to share that with Craig. And Craig's faith was strong. Strong as he was, and even stronger. And that was impressive for Craig. So with that today, I think it's very comforting for all of us to know that Craig is in God's glory. And it was just a blessing for all of us to know him. Thank you.
I'm Ken Lorenzini. I'm Carolyn's brother, Craig's brother-in-law. And of course, I could tell a lot of stories, and as Pastor said, we just don't have that kind of time. But two quick stories that come to mind was once when we visited my folks when they just moved to Texas. We were sitting around at Christmas time listening to some Christmas music and got on this religious discussion. And as Pastor said, Craig, he has a big heart, and he wanted to share his faith with my dad, who was born and raised Catholic. And we got on a discussion of religion. Well, sometimes Craig's mouth got ahead of his brains, and he said, Ray, you know, the Pope is Antichrist. X-nay on the Pope, Craig. So my dad and Craig had kind of this love-hate relationship for 30-some years, but my dad truly loved Craig, and I know Craig loved my dad, and that's who he was. And towards the end of my dad's life, we went on a family cruise, and the whole family remembers this one. But we'd planned on, my dad was in a wheelchair at that point, and Craig wanted to be his Sherpa and push him around. So, you know, 9 o'clock, we're on the dock tomorrow, Craig, and we're going to go into town and do what we need to do. And by the way, you know, there's a fire drill tomorrow for the crew, so be careful. Okay, yeah. So we're out on the dock at 9 o'clock, fire drill goes off, and we're waiting. Where's Craig? I said, he probably went to 7-Eleven to get a Slurpee. I don't know. But we're waiting for him. Finally shows up about a half hour later. Sweat running down his head, running, screaming, Ray, I got you now. Craig, what happened to you? Well, I got locked down in the casino. Well, what were you doing in the casino? Well, I was trying to get change. Well, Craig, you knew we were going to be here yesterday. Why didn't you get change? And that was, again, the relationship they have. But Craig said, sorry, Ray, I tried to get here as fast as I could. And I could just see my dad Friday morning with Craig coming in and saying, Ray, I got here as fast as I could. And we're going to miss Craig.
My name is George Jasinick. For those of you that don't remember me or don't know me, I was blessed to be coached by Craig, to be taught by him. I was not an athlete, but that didn't matter to Craig. He taught me how to play ball. With Joe here, Greg, and of course, our young little second baseman, Pastor Pat. I remember I was driving around, and I like to read bumper stickers. People take the time to put them on there, and I thought it'd only be decent if I take the time to read them. I read one time. There was absolutely no hesitation in me whatsoever. When I read that one, I thought of Craig Woodworth. Real men love Jesus. And that was Craig. Now, Pastor Pat, going back to your story about Craig coming out to that softball game an hour and a half after his daughter was born, did we win that night? Thank you.
My name is Hayes Connor. Like so many of you here, had the Woodworths come into our lives when we were young kids. Just one thing to share. Craig used to cut my hair when I was a kid, and when he was done, I would just stand up and say, "Hey, thanks, I'm going to go." And he said, "Now, wait a minute." He said, "You need to sweep up your own hair." He said, "This is an analogy for life, Hayes." He said, if somebody else offers to cut your hair, you sweep up your own hair. And, it's been many years since I had spent any meaningful time with Craig, but the memories that we have, our whole family of him, everything from our employer at one point to our softball coach and friend, mentor, all those things I like to wake up in the morning and think sometimes we remember how much we love someone, and that I think was the case here. It didn't matter how many years had gone by, you think, wow, I really did love him. And so our condolences to your family, and God bless you. So.
Couple of more.
Hi, my name's Smitty, and unlike most of you, I haven't known Craig a very long time, probably about 10, 12 years, and I met him through his family, and probably a good thing that we didn't know each other when we were younger, because, well, maybe more than he wouldn't be here, but I would just say that I think that one of the things that shows the love of a great man and his commitment and everything shows through his family with his lovely wife Carolyn and all his kids and everything. And one of the things that I will miss is every time I worked on a cruise ship for 8 years, and every time I come back in town we'd get together, but every time I left he'd be like, "Smitty!" and that big hug that you'd get, and it was genuine. And when you have that human connection and someone's genuine, you can just tell that. And I'll miss that. And he was a genuine guy, and he was a great guy, and he has a great family. And I love him a lot. And I will keep him in mind, whether I'm doing right or wrong.
Thank you.
My name's Wally Mottridge, and my wife Debbie. We met the Woodworths more or less in the middle of their ages. We were both young marrieds at the time. They lived in our neighborhood, and our kids went to school together and had a lot of good years together. And Craig was a big guy, and you're right, he had a big heart. And we played on the same softball team for many, many years. And that was one of those feature moments when they tell everybody, "Get back, go back, he's up to bat." It didn't matter. Over their heads it went. And it was just that he was just a great ball player. And it was just, like you said, everybody stopped to see Craig bat. I could hardly wait to watch him hit the ball. So, our families have been a long time friends, and we used to go to this church when it was Heart to Heart, and our kids went to this school when it was Heart to Heart school. So, Carolyn, we love you. Kids, we love you. Thank you for just the great memories.
My name's Shane Newton, and I was a colleague of Craig's. I probably had lunch with him twice a week. And I'm no surfer like him, and we like cheap lunches. And
Unless
he
you
always
were
had
buying.
coupons in his truck. And we'd call each other up, hey, where you at in town? And we'll be pretty close. And he's like, hey, I got some coupons, Taco Tuesday on Valley Lunas. And I'm like, hey, Taco Tuesday sounds good to me, I'm buying. So we went into there, and I walk up there and I said, 5 tacos, 1 for me and 4 for him. And the lady goes, well, it's $15. I said, $15? And she goes, yeah. I go, how about Taco Tuesday? And she goes, well, today's Wednesday. So I'm looking at Craig and I'm like, hey, today's Wednesday. He goes, oh, totally spaced it on that. So he was just one of those guys that you just loved him no matter what. And he was so proud of getting a new truck for work. And he goes, come on out and see my new truck. So I was all excited for him, and I come out and he had a little white car. And I'm like, what is that? And he goes, that's my new truck. That's my work truck. And I go, well, how you gonna put a ladder on that? And he goes, I'm gonna put it inside of it. But he was one of those guys. He always was very optimistic, and he just knew good things were around the corner. So thanks, Craig. You owe me lunch.
Hi, we're the Wilders. I'm Robert, and this is Judy. We live next door to the Woodworths. One of my fondest memories of Craig is what I call our trash can talks. We every so many weeks we would somehow gather around our trash cans and just catch up with one another. Surfing, I'm a surfer as well. Family, work, it didn't matter, and it was just a great way to catch up with your neighbor. He's the first neighbor and made us feel comfortable in our neighborhood. He came out and shook my hand the weekend we moved in and said, welcome to the neighborhood. He never stopped being compassionate and giving, and I'm going to really miss him, and my condolences from our family to yours.
One more, and then...
Hi, everybody. My name's Joe, and this is my wife, Ashley, here. And I went to school with Katie and Demir. And Craig was, he was just one of the nicest guys ever, when I got to know him. At first, I was scared of him because, any guy hanging out with his daughter, 7th grade, he's not going to like him, right, So, I just remember Craig, he was just always had a smile on his face every time I come over the house. And it was funny because, I'd come in and here's this big guy standing up to come and greet me, but, he just not very, graceful. Here's these little dogs tripping over his feet, and he's like a drunken ballerina, all over the place, and, I just remember, always Craig just putting a big smile on everybody's face, and, him always opening his house up to everybody, having dinner over, we'd always go over his house and swim in his pool even when he wasn't there, and, but he, that's just who, Craig was, he was just always arms open and always willing to open his home up to anybody. So, love you guys.
Thanks. Well, I'm sure there are many more Craig stories. There's some note cards out on the guest book table, and so I'd invite you to, if you didn't get a chance to share, to jot that down and let the Woodworths take that home and be encouraged by that. There's also a memorial page on Facebook, and you can post memories or photos there if you'd like, and I know that would be encouraging to them. We're going to sing one more song that is sort of a favorite of Craig's, and then I'll come back and close this out.
rejoice. He wraps himself in light, and darkness tries to hide, and trembles at his voice, trembles at his voice. How great is our God? Sing with me, how great is our God. All will see how great is our God. And age to age he stands, and time is in his hands. Beginning and the end, beginning and the end. And the Godhead three in one. Father, Spirit, Son, the Lion and the Lamb, the Lion and the Lamb. How great is our God? Sing with me, how great is our God? All will see how great is our God. Let's sing name above all names. You are the name above all names, worthy of all praise, and my heart will sing how great is our God. Name above all names. You are the name above all names, worthy of all praise, and my heart will sing how great is our God. How great is our God? Sing with me, how great is our God? All will see how great is our God. How great, and how great is our God? Sing with me, how great is our God? All will see how great is our God.
I'd like to invite you to stay if you'd like. In a second, I'm going to pray. We're going to open up these doors over here, and we have some refreshments, and you can hang around and catch up and chat with the Woodworths. And Craig spans 30 years at this church, and so there are several generations of church people at this service. And so feel free to hang around as long as you want, share memories of Craig. Don't forget to write on a card or go to the Facebook. And if you didn't get to see the photo montage that we put on before the service started, we're going to show those photos again so you could hang around and watch those if you'd like. So would you pray with me? God, I thank you for Craig. I thank you for the privilege of having known him, of having him invested in my life and in my family. And I thank you for forgiving him so that he could love you and us. God, I pray that you would comfort us when we miss him, that you would provide for us in his absence, and that you would help us live hopeful each day of the promise that we will see him again. And God, remind us regularly to love like he loved, to see people the way he saw people. And God, I pray that you would make yourself known to us in a personal way, the way you did to Craig. Thank you for this good man and his legacy and his love. In Jesus' name, amen.